Dr. Bod and I concluded that he was shot at least 6 times. We've got one to the very top of the head, the apex. We've got one that entered just above the right eyebrow. We've got one that entered the top part of the right arm. We've got a graze wound, a superficial graze wound to the middle part of the right arm. We've got a wound that entered the medial aspect of the right arm, and we've got a deep graze wound that produced a laceration to the palm of the right hand.
Let us start with the facts. There is at this moment only one person who can tell us exactly what happened the day Michael Brown was shot in a Ferguson, Missouri street, the police officer who fired the 6 shots. We have already heard from various witnesses and those who might be pretending to have seen what occurred, and the autopsies have proven some of these statements faulty. And now what began as a possible crime has exploded into a national debate about police and tactics. There is a need to begin with what we actually know, and only then ask where we might go from here. Welcome back to MidPoint. Florida-based criminal defense attorney and a member of the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, Janet Johnson. Janet, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Janet, from an attorney standpoint now, we have dueling autopsies. We have the Attorney General coming into town right now. How difficult is it going to be, at least in a public perception, to unravel so much of what has gone on here and actually find the truth and then get people to believe you're telling them the truth?
Well, I think it's going to happen in secret because a grand jury will be impaneled maybe as early as tomorrow, and they'll decide whether to indict. And we all know grand juries meet behind closed doors. We're not allowed to see what happens. Even lawyers, defense lawyers, aren't there. Although in Missouri, the officer actually can testify, and he might take the stand as early as tomorrow, and a jury may decide whether to indict him or not. Those are the people who are going to decide what the facts are.
What are you seeing thus far, again, from the attorney's standpoint, from the facts? And remember, I began this by saying we need to get the facts, and we still don't have them all. They are coming out in drips and drabs, as you might expect.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the people responsible for that would either be Mr. McCullough, who's the state attorney, or the prosecutor who's in charge of bringing these charges, or the police department. I think the problem on the ground in Ferguson is the police department initially were out front basically supporting one of their own, which is natural, but they're the people who would potentially be investigating this. And if there isn't a special prosecutor assigned or a special investigating body assigned, it's really hard to get the narrative out there to know what the facts are. The first thing that's released is this video of a strong arm robbery, which, as it turns out, may or may not even have been on the mind of the officer when he shot Mr. Brown. It's just a mess, basically, at this point.
Now, let's talk about that mess. You mentioned, of course, that video that we saw of Michael Brown in the convenience store that came out at a time when those on the ground were saying it just seemed to be a little bit too convenient. Was that the biggest mistake thus far that Ferguson has made, or at least the police department has made, releasing that video at the time they did?
I think it's the biggest mistake. It's not the only mistake, though. I think what they did that was really probably a bad idea from a PR standpoint is they basically took a side right from the beginning. And if they're going to do an investigation, they have to appear impartial. That may be impossible. I mean, it might be that this is somebody who they know and they like and they care about, but they initially basically said, this is the narrative, this is what happened, and it was really just a one-sided narrative. They also leaked certain pieces of information, and before they had a complete picture, even they said we don't have a complete picture, they did let out some things that, essentially didn't add to the narrative at all. It's a PR nightmare, and I think they just mishandled it.
Which do you see? I mean, you mentioned the grand jury, of course, and that could take weeks. Now we have the U.S. Justice Department who's involved as well. I guess it's going to be a race to see who actually gets the facts out there first. Which one would you guess is going to be faster?
I think that the state's going to be faster, but the concern again is, are they going to be able to do an effective job, or do they want to do an effective job? If the first piece of evidence that the police leaked was that video, is that going to be what's presented to the grand jury? Is that the kind of evidence they're going to get? As a lawyer, what we always say is you can indict, or a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. So we know it's really easy to get an indictment. So if they don't, that could certainly add fuel to the fire.
Now, the family had a private autopsy done, but that will not actually be part of the prosecution's case, correct? And would you then tell us why?
Right, that's correct, because that was not commissioned by the government. The government has their own autopsy. You know, Dr. Bodden, who's a very renowned pathologist, he's the person who did the family's autopsy. He spoke very highly in his press conference yesterday of the government autopsy, the woman who, or the person who's conducting that. He seemed to endorse that body that's doing the autopsy. So I'm not sure that it's ultimately that different. One of the things they've already kind of let out is that there may have been marijuana in Mr. Brown's system. I don't know that that's going to have a lot to do with what happened in terms of being shot in the head. I don't know if marijuana affected that, but I think that the autopsies aren't going to be that different. And then there'll be a third autopsy, which is the feds.
Final question here. St. Louis County Prosecutor Robert McCullough is the one who is in charge right now. He has a father, mother, brother, uncle, and cousin, all worked in the police department. His dad was killed while responding to a call involving a black suspect. As an attorney, wouldn't you prefer maybe that someone else handle the case? Because this, again, looks like a potential PR nightmare.
Right. Not even just as an attorney, but as Mr. McCullough, as the government, I wouldn't want to have the appearance of impropriety. That's the buzzwords that we always use in the law. I would say, listen, I don't have a conflict. I don't think I have a conflict, but I'm going to step aside and let's appoint somebody who we know doesn't have a conflict and that you have confidence in.
Janet Johnson, thanks for giving us a little bit of the legal side of things. Always a pleasure. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let us now spin to the Opinionator. Welcome to MidPoint, anti-crime activist, also known as the Hood Conservative. Based in New Orleans, Louisiana, Nadra Enzi joins us. Nadra, thanks so much for being here.
Greetings, fellow hostages.
From what you have heard in this whole case right now, people are coming from out of state to protest. First of all, let me ask, are these opportunists here? And then how do you separate the opportunists from the people who are actually on the ground who don't know enough to stay off the streets?
I think you're being very kind. They are criminals. Let's be very frank. The same type of rioting that we're seeing today is the rioting that goes on every day in the inner city. And to see a bunch of arsonists and heinous individuals trying to inflame an already incendiary situation in Ferguson invites disaster for all concerned. I would like to think that local and state authorities have the political will to go ahead and round up and lock up as many of these guys as possible. Because all they're doing is muddying the water, making an unsafe situation infinitely less safe.
In your opinion, then, are the police doing things, certainly the police, the National Guard, the state troopers who are on the ground at this moment, are they currently doing the right thing, and are they at least handling it with some measure of discipline?
I wholeheartedly support them, and I would add that when people talk about police militarization, I would counter by stating, what about thug militarization? It hasn't gone unnoticed, but you have gang members who are coming down there, people are being shot, people are being harmed. They have nothing to do with the protests, they have nothing to do with the various investigations going on. This is merely a chance for them to harm more people and to do with the world watching what they do in their various communities. And I add their various communities because many of them are not even from Ferguson. Ferguson has become a target of malicious opportunity from black thugs on one end and white anarchists on the other.
I got about 45, 50 seconds left right here. We have seen media on the ground who at many times seem to be trying to become part of the story here. Is that just as distressing to you as anything else, and certainly adds to what might be an incorrect narrative?
I understand that there's a rush to be in part of the 21st century version of perhaps the LA riots or perhaps the Rodney King riots. People have to exercise common sense at all times. It's a volatile situation. You have armed and dangerous people who are attempting to co-opt a questionable public outcry already. And news members are not exempt from possibly being called up by either side in the struggle that's going on before us.
Nadra Enzi, we appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to join us as the Opinionator. We'll definitely talk to you again very soon because I have a feeling, unfortunately, this story is going to be going on for some time. Again, we thank you for your time and your opinions.
My pleasure.
All right, later on this hour, Telling It Like It Is dares everyone and anyone to listen up and learn a lesson in how to seriously have a discussion about issues such as the riots and police actions in Ferguson, Missouri. There is a way we're talking. There is a way America is discussing this that, simply put, is not doing us any good whatsoever. And after the break, the end of the Tea Party? You better believe there will be some reaction to that statement. Also, what the Tea Party is saying about God getting involved in a dispute? That's all coming up on MidPoint, where we question everything.